In 1979, Minolta released a 250mm mirror reflex lens. At the time of the release of this lens, it was $139. Now, fast forward many years later, this lens has been out of production for quite some time, and a mint condition copy can cost up to $3,000, with an average copy costing around $900 to $1,000. And the high demand for this lens was primarily based around two things. One, the size and weight of the lens for a 250mm lens, and the second thing is the optical performance of this lens as a mirror reflex lens, because many mirror reflex lenses out there have very poor optical performance when compared to standard or traditional lenses. But this seems to have opened an opportunity for somebody to release a new mirror reflex lens with a similar feature set at a lower price point than the used price point of the Minolta. This is a new release lens by TTArtisan. They sent this lens out to me prior to release at no cost to myself. This isn't a paid or sponsored video, and they had no say in the making of the video. At the time that I'm shooting this video, I could only find one place that it's going to be for sale. Now, it hasn't been released yet, so it might be some other places, but I will put those links in the description down below for the place that you will be able to find it. The other thing you should know about this lens is it's being released on an M42 screw mount. TTArtisan is essentially using this mount as a universal mount, so you can buy this lens and mount it on any modern camera. Now, because it is an M42 screw mount lens, you are going to have to use an adapter to adapt it to whatever camera system that you're using. So I'll put a list of the different adapters in the description down below. They're really, really cheap, and once you buy one, you then have it to use on any M42 screw mount lens. That can be a modern release by TTArtisan or someone else, or it can be a vintage screw mount lens, of which there are many out there. And the one thing that I'm absolutely loving using this lens for is street photography. And in street photography, using a 250mm telephoto lens that is this small is about the same as having an invisibility cloak. It allows you to get an image that is so close, so detailed, and so intimate in what people are doing in their daily lives, but they have no idea that you're there. If you were using a proper zoom lens that went to 250mm, it doesn't matter where you are. You would look like a sports photographer trying to shoot somebody across the street or a long way away. But with this size, just nobody has any idea you're there. It also allows me, in a lot of street photography sense, I often will shoot from the hip, because once you hold that camera to your eye, it's quite obvious that someone is taking a picture or video, and having a camera in front of your face really draws attention. But with this lens, because it is so telephoto and you're seeing so far away, you can hold it to your eye, and the people that you're focusing on, in all likelihood, think you're taking a picture of the whole building that they're standing in front of. They have no idea that you're getting an image that is as close as it is. So for that reason, I absolutely love this invisibility cloak type thing. And I love the fact that it allows me to use the camera held up to my eye in a way that I can't in other situations, but still get a really intimate, detailed look into someone's life. The other thing that a 250mm lens does that a standard street photography 35 or 50mm lens does not is it gives you a lot of image compression. And image compression is where the things in the foreground, the things in the midground, and the things in the background all seem closer to each other than they do when you're shooting with a wide angle lens. When you're shooting with a wider lens, it takes that subject and then it takes the background and pushes it away. So the background seems further away. The more telephoto the lens you use, the more it brings the foreground, midground, and background together. And this creates this compressed image that we're not used to seeing, particularly in street photography. And 250mm is a focal length that you would not often see for street photography, primarily because of the size and conspicuous nature of those lenses. But when you're able to shoot with this, you get this incredible image compression, which is pretty unique in street photography. You don't see a lot, but it looks really cool. And I particularly like it when you've got like a train line or a long tram tracks. You just get this really cool, surreal image. And often you can just throw a person in the center of frame when you've got some leading lines, and you get some really, really interesting images that you don't often see in street photography. The other thing I want you to know is that f5.6, when we think of lenses that shoot at f5.6, we generally don't think about the ability to get a blurry background. And if we were shooting at a 35mm lens at f5.6, that would be true. We would really have a hard time getting some subject isolation and blurring out the background and drawing the attention to the subject. But when you're shooting at 250mm at f5.6, you can get quite a blurry background as long as you have a little bit of distance between your subject and the background. So because of that, you can walk around a city or any sort of situation, find a subject, focus on them, and in a lot of situations, you are going to remove that distracting background with a blurry background, even if you're shooting at f5.6. One of the other unique features of all mirror reflex lenses is donut or ring bokeh. Basically, when you have something in the frame that is in focus, it just looks like it's been taken with a normal photography lens or normal video lens. But when that thing is out of focus, particularly when it's a specular highlight, it becomes this ring-shaped bokeh or background blur, which is really a unique character of these lenses. And the way this works is the information goes into the lens around that black dot on the center of the lens. It then bounces off a dish-shaped mirror at the back of the lens, bounces back to a mirror that is on the inside of that black dot, and then bounces back through the glass optic in the rear element of the lens. This creates a situation where anything that's out of focus has this ring-shaped bokeh or interesting background blur. And I will say this is absolutely a personal preference. You may like it, you may hate it, you may not care either way. But it is a unique feature of mirror reflex lenses that some people see as desirable, and it's also something that can't be recreated or faked with a blurry background in your phone or some sort of Photoshop editing. So it is a unique feature of these lenses that you can really only get by using this optical type formula. Using this lens for street photography isn't the only use. There are some people that use them for gimbal use or drone use. They are popular in any situation where you need a telephoto lens that is quite light. But for me, in my use, street photography is just what I'm absolutely loving about this lens. And even though this lens can cost as little as 10% of the vintage or used equivalent, the build quality on this thing is excellent, and it really feels like a very premium build. Still has somewhat of a vintage lens look and feel to it, but it is very, very smooth to turn the focus, and I found focusing the lens super easy. Now, the other thing that you should know about this lens is it is an f5.6 aperture, and that's it. Just like the original Minolta lens, you cannot change the aperture at all. So you start with f5.6 and you're stuck with f5.6. You do lose some creative control by being locked into an f5.6 aperture. That means we can't open the lens up more to say f2.8 and get a more blurry background. And it means we can't stop the lens down to something like f9 or f11 and get a less blurry background. The other thing about the lens at f5.6, that does not allow a whole lot of light in. So this is not a low light lens by any means. This is more something that you're going to use in broad daylight or when you have a fair bit of light in a situation. The lens also comes with this little screw-on metal lens hood. Now, I don't think this does a whole lot for flare or glare performance, but what it does do is gives you a little bit of extra protection of that fragile front element in the front of the lens. It also comes with a front and rear lens cap. Looking at some of the optical performance on the lens, I found the distortion and vignette very well controlled. I didn't see any issues there. There was little to no chromatic aberration, which I was kind of surprised by. Glare is a place that a lot of these mirror lenses in the past have had a problem. I have had very little glare performance issues with this lens. I was shooting like a building up in the sky at one point, and I got a little bit of this weird glare desaturation look. But in all my other real world images in a number of different situations, it was not a problem. And I can say that I think it's probably much, much better than the old vintage mirror reflex lenses out there. This lens also has a very long minimum focus distance. It's like 2 meters or over 6 feet. So it is not something you're going to use for close-up images. But because it is 250 millimeters, it still does zoom in quite a bit. So when I did use it at those distances, the image was very sharp and detailed, but I wouldn't say it's something that you're going to get some major magnification with or use like a macro lens. And looking at sharpness, the sharpness on this lens is not at a level that you would see out of the highest end modern photography lenses, but it is well above what you would see out of traditional mirror reflex lenses, and I think it's better than most vintage lenses I've ever tested. So I would say if I'm just looking at the sharpness and detail that this lens is rendering, it's certainly good enough for everything that I would use it for. And in most situations, I would consider it excellent, but I wouldn't put it on par with the best photography lenses out there. The other thing that you will find with this lens and other mirror reflex lenses is they tend to be just slightly lower contrast than a modern photography lens. Once again, I think this is a much better performance than we've seen out of traditional mirror reflex lenses in the past, but I think you have to be ready for that. You're going to get a slightly lower contrast image. It's certainly close enough that just tweaking it in editing is going to bring that contrast back to a level that looks indistinguishable to a photo that I'm taking with any of my modern photography lenses. But right out of camera, the images are going to be slightly lower contrast than what you might be used to. And when it comes to bokeh, I think this is a pretty important one because when you're taking a blurry background shot, which this lens gets a lot of, oftentimes most of the image is out of focus. You might only have 15 or 20% of the image that's in focus, and the whole rest of the frame is out of focus. And this is going to get you this very interesting style of background blur that you only get from mirror reflex lenses. You're going to get this donut or ring bokeh. And I think it's something you have to decide if it's something you like, can tolerate, or can't stand, because it is a huge aspect of the image that this lens gives you. So I think you absolutely have to be comfortable with that. And I don't think there is a right or wrong. It is a completely personal preference thing. And I would say for myself, when I shot with that first mirror reflex lens that I covered probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was really cool, but I wasn't 100% sure about it. But now that I've used the second one and I've been using them a bit more, I absolutely love it. And even in situations where I'm not sure what I think of that, the fact that the lens is so small and so discreet that allows me to get images that I just wouldn't get otherwise, even in those specific shots, if I don't love the ring bokeh, I still know that's a shot that I wouldn't have got without this type of lens. This is the second new release mirror reflex lens that I've covered in the past month. And I've just thrown a video on screen now. That is the first one I've covered. And there's a lot of similar image quality traits and the way that you use mirror reflex lenses covered in that video as well. So if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper, then I suggest you check out that video.